That came out great. That came out great. I love it. Oh my God. I love it because that can make me cry because of my mom and dad. That's like, that's really nice.
Kids fantasy art.
Kids fantasy art.
Kids fantasy art.
Well, and I said, what's this fantastic artwork? Who did this?
I think they look like little superstars,
Kids fantasy art.
Kids fantasy art.
Kids fantasy art.
There were kids, and then there were toys and cartoon characters and celebrities and anything.
Kids fantasy art.
Kids fantasy art.
Kids fantasy art.
When you look at his artwork, you see the kids' faces, and that's what you really want to notice. And then the artwork kind of comes in the background.
Kids fantasy art.
Kids fantasy art.
Kids fantasy art.
So now half the restaurant has kids fantasy art.
Parents are always looking for a creative way to mark milestones in their kids' life, either their ages, whatnot, and this is a creative way to come back each year and have something different.
Kids fantasy art.
Kids fantasy art.
Kids fantasy art.
Kids fantasy art.
Kids fantasy art. Not just a picture. It's absolutely beautiful.
Kids fantasy art.
Kids fantasy art.
I like kids fantasy art because it takes the child and the family and everything the child can imagine and it puts it together in one piece.
Kids fantasy art.
Kids fantasy art. It's all about the kids. Kids fantasy art.
Regular school photography is, outdated and antiquated.
Kids fantasy art.
Colors of it, everything that he likes is surrounding it. It's original, it's creative. We all like it.
Kids fantasy art.
Like a dream popping out of the picture.
Kids fantasy art. Kids fantasy art.
Completely unique, nothing I've ever seen.
Kids fantasy art.
It's a kid's dream.
Kids fantasy art.
Mugs, it could be games, it could be jigsaw puzzles.
Kids fantasy art.
It's very realistic, but it still has the color and everything as if it's cartoons.